Welcome back to the Tea Party Power Hour. My name is Mark Galar. My guest today is Miss Catherine Engelbrecht. She's a wife, a mother, a business owner, a native Texan, and a lifelong practitioner of common sense, which means she can't be a Democrat. She is first and foremost the co founder of True the Vote, an organization that attempts to maintain voter integrity throughout the United States. You probably will recognize her from one of her many appearances to promote the movie 2000 Mules. Catherine, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
I can't even begin to tell you how impressed I am with what you and Greg have done. You've proven to the world that we have a voter integrity issue, and anyone who doesn't believe that, I think, is just intentionally looking the other way and not wanting to see it. But let me ask you one question about you before we dive into some questions here and some of these attacks that have gone against True the Vote and 2000 Mules. How did you get into this? I mean, no one wakes up one day and just decides, I'm going to start an organization to ensure voter integrity. I mean, how does that happen?
Definitely not. No, it was quite by accident. Look, I mean, I said for years I have no previous political experience. I guess at this point, so seeing as how I've been in this since 2009, I can no longer say I'm a newbie. But certainly, when I started, it was simply because there were not enough volunteers to work at the polls in our local elections. And so a small group, just born of the Tea Party movement, had come together to say, what can we do? Because, we were going to rallies, that's great, but the passion has to translate into action. So what's something that we can do in our community that is, a way to check the box on the good citizenship checklist, and working in the elections was one. And never in my wildest imagination was it going to ever evolve into anything more than just a volunteer effort to work at the elections? But what happened was that at that very first election cycle, those of us that worked saw, most of us had great experiences, which is what we should all hope for. But there were enough of us that came back together in the aftermath of the process and said, "Man, there were some really screwy things that occurred." And we compared notes and realized that, again, looking at this still just, with the eyes of innocence, we thought, well, there seems to be some fundamental breakdowns of the process, particularly in the area of inaccuracies in the voter rolls. So why don't we take a closer look at that and see if we can come up with something that would help the county, and then we'll move on to other projects. And so we having seen problems at the polls, we began a research into those problems, recognized that in fact the voter rolls were not only inaccurate to a worrisome degree, but moreover, at that point, were actively being, I would say, assaulted by a group that had come into town that was making claims of registering hundreds of thousands of people in a very short period of time. And our follow up was, through open records, uncovered that while they were submitting those registrations, they were not accurate registrations and shouldn't be entered into the voter rolls. And that set off it's a longer story for a different day, but the county that we were working in called a press conference. That press conference made national news, and it was like a dog whistle had been sounded to crush True the Vote. And it's been an adventure ever since.
That's an incredible story, and I love the fact that it started that way because some of the best things in life start by accident, and it sounds like, in a way, that's kind of what happened, at least in terms of how it took off. Now, I want to get right into 2000 Mules because I was watching the night that the debut occurred, and the response from the left was almost immediate. It was vicious, and they came out with all kinds of things that they were saying about it was just false. There was no truth to it. The GPS tracking information that you guys analyzed wasn't accurate enough to determine whether or not these mules were actually going by these drop off boxes. What was your initial response to the enormous amount of criticism that 2000 and Mules received from the media and from the left, and even a few people on the right in the early going?
I expected it. I mean, we're no stranger to, um, the presentation of inconvenient truths that uh, elements on both the left and the right work overtime to bury and cover up. And what comes to mind, although it's probably not the best mental picture, but is from the picture of oh gosh, now I've lost the name of the movie, but it's Madagascar. Madagascar, a cartoon Pixar movie where they have the famous penguins that just kind of stand together in a little band and say, "Just smile and wave, boys, smile and wave." Well, that's how I feel. That's how I feel about the groups that stand against us routinely on both the left and the right, and saying, just keep saying there's nothing to see, keep saying that True the Vote doesn't know what it's talking about. And so I take it all with a bit of a grain of salt. I don't read our press. I try to respond faithfully to journalists who actually reach out, which is very few. Most just write what they're going to write. But the cognitive dissonance that it takes to to look at our work relative to geospatial tracking, where we brought in expert analysts to deduce a subset of the population that was operating in ways that could only be tied to the stopping at drop boxes, because we had geofenced around drop boxes. We can get into that in whatever level of depth you choose. But the same level of analysts that work routinely with federal law enforcement, same people, by the way, to in our setting, couldn't be trusted. But the same types of data and some of the same people were being employed by federal law enforcement in J6, which seems to have had no holds barred in making their arrests based on tracking of cell phones. The fact is that cell phone data is is used every day by law enforcement, and far more than law enforcement. I mean, we're being tracked by all manner of interested parties, including the government, in ways that would shock and horrify the average American. It's a true fact that we are the product, and we are being tracked. What made us unique is that we were bold enough to put an awful lot of resources and time into an investigation that we didn't talk about publicly until we knew that we had the goods. Um, and it took these elements, the smile and wave elements, that there's nothing to see here, maintain the status quo at all costs. Took them by such shock that they overreacted, and that is, I believe, why you saw both the overwhelming negativity, but also overwhelming support. I mean, it was really sort of cut down the middle in many respects. And and all I can tell you is the data is accurate, the findings were true. um, you know it was never our intention to make a movie. In fact, so many things had to go wrong for the movie to be made. We had intended only to present everything to law enforcement and let them do their investigations. We could only do so much with the data. It was to them to have the data de-anonymized and do the things that they routinely do in investigations, but that in this case they didn't do, because it didn't serve the propaganda narrative of it's all a lie, and there's no problem. We blew a hole in that, and they had to work overtime to try to discredit us, so that the furtherance of those investigations would never see the light of day. And an effective job, but they didn't stop us from making a movie and waking up a lot of Americans along the way.
You mentioned the propaganda against you. I can't even imagine what it would be like to turn on the television or a computer and see the Attorney General of the United States or the former Attorney General of the United States making fun of credible work. What I'd like to do is play this
Mm-hmm.
clip from Bill Barr. In this clip, he makes three claims, and then I want to have you address each one of those claims because I don't know that it's been done exactly like this before. And frankly,
Sure.
when we're done here, I'd like to package it up and I'm going to send it out to about 200 journalists. So let's begin by letting you hear a clip of Bill Barr's opinion of 2000 Mules. You can hear in this clip he actually laughs about the movie, which I didn't
Mm-hmm.
think there was anything funny in that movie at all. But here we go.
My opinion then and my opinion now is that the election was not stolen by fraud. And I haven't seen anything since the election that changes my mind on that, including the 2000 Mules movie.
Familiar with the 2000? Well, maybe you can assess that 2000 Mules, and people are talking about that.
Well, I mean, just in a nutshell, I just think that the GBI was unimpressed with it, and I was similarly unimpressed with it because I think I was holding my fire on that to see what the photographic evidence was because I thought, well, hell, if they have a lot of photographs of the same person dumping a lot of ballots in different boxes, that's hard to explain. So I wanted to see what the photographic evidence was, but the cell phone data is singularly unimpressive. I mean, it basically, if you take 2 million cell phones and figure out where they are physically in a big city like Atlanta or wherever, just by definition, you're going to find many hundreds of them have passed by and spent time in the vicinity of these boxes. And the premise that, if you go by a box, 5 boxes or whatever it was, that's a mule is just indefensible. It by definition, you're going to have hundreds of this. I mean, I saw one contractor said, we figured out that our truck alone would account for 6 cell phone signals. This was some kind of contractor, and our route would take us by these things on a regular basis. So but then when the movie came out, I think the photographic evidence in it was completely I mean, there was a little bit of it, but it was lacking. It didn't establish widespread illegal harvesting. The other thing is people don't understand is that it's not clear that even if you can show harvesting, that changes the results of the election. The courts are not going to throw out votes and then figure out what votes were harvested and throw them out. It's still the burden on the challenging party to show that illegal votes were cast. Votes were the result of undue influence or bribes, or there was really, the person was non compos mentis. But absent that evidence, I just didn't see courts throwing out votes anyway.
Okay, well, there you go. Bill Barr basically making three claims in there. Let's take the photographic evidence thing first. One of the things Bill Barr said is that he was looking for seeing the same people dropping off stacks of ballots at a drop box, and he didn't essentially see that. Personally, I was bothered by the fact that people were wearing latex gloves and taking pictures of themselves doing it, but apparently Bill Barr didn't even notice that. But let's get back to why we don't see pictures of the same people over and over dropping off ballots at one particular ballot box, or maybe the same person going to 25, 26 ballot boxes and dropping off ballots. Why didn't that videographic evidence ever materialize, ever manifest?
Well, it it has manifested and it does exist. It just wasn't put in the movie because the movie had a requirement for being able to see video on a big screen. Most of I mean, if you lost the images because they were overly pixelated, or as most of the video, unfortunately, um, was uh, defined or was produced. Um, the cameras themselves were not pointed directly at the drop boxes, pointed at the ground. A lot of the mules or people that were repeatedly, there's so many things I want to take apart in what the clip that was just played, but people that were repeatedly going to these drop boxes, they didn't go during the day, they went at night. And so if you didn't have good lighting or if the camera wasn't well positioned, you just saw shadowy figures. The only thing that tied them was cell phone pings. And so a lot of that is expected inside of, a proper law enforcement regulated investigation, but it doesn't sort of, play well on the big screen. And so what Dinesh, and we had we made available the files that we had at the time, which is a whole nother level of discussion, because getting the video itself was a terrific challenge. But that aside, we had hundreds and hundreds of clips. The ones that Dinesh and his team chose were the ones that would tell a story on the screen. Were they the ones we would have chosen? Probably not, but it's very important to be able, we're, as America, we're sort of very spoiled to, wanting to see the full color spread, and that's what they did. But to take what Bill Barr said in context, let me tell you our side of that story, okay?
Okay.
Bill Barr, as head of the Department of Justice, is also therefore head of the FBI. We were working with his FBI agents throughout this process because we had also come into contact with what we perceived to be immediately a national security threat through the finding of a election software provider called Conic that was tightly affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party, and in fact was storing American election data in China and running their operations from China and providing the same services that they were ostensibly providing here in the States to the People's Congress of China. You couldn't get, you storing the information on the same servers. All of that to say, we were working with the FBI on that matter. And because it was happening simultaneously to our work with the geospatial evidence, what we read the FBI in. We were working with two special agents of the intelligence community that their job is to surface data and then provide that data to the appropriate extended parties. So in our case, because we researched the patterns of geospatial traffic in 5 jurisdictions, we worked with these FBI agents to set up data hubs in the 5 areas, because our thought was, and very naively, but our thought was, all manner of law enforcement clearly is going to want this. We were very concerned about the loss of chain of custody, and if it just became us just sending out these massive data sets just all over the place, we would lose control of the potentially the versioning of those sets. We didn't want to leave anything to chance. And so we asked the FBI, again, Bill Barr's oversight, right? We asked them, would you help us make introductions to the various jurisdictions? We will place the primary data sets with the FBI office in these various regions, because they all had their offices there. And then the appropriate law enforcement can come and you can work with them, and the FBI can work with them to make sure that the chain of custody is never broken. The metadata all stays intact for what we believe to be, if seen to its fullest, it would have been, you talk about, the word RICO is thrown around very liberally now, about, collusive efforts. That's what we thought we were looking at, still believe what we were looking at in the data. All this to say, Bill Barr also talks about the GBI being unimpressed. Well, even as he is describing what he saw, what I know from that is he's not being an honest broker in his description of events, because it was the FBI that provided that data to the GBI. The FBI provided it because they believed that it was, um, let's just say, was interesting enough to warrant a full investigation. And I have hard copy from the FBI saying as much, talking about it in terms of this is the smoking gun. So when we provided that data to the FBI to provide it to the GBI refused to even, when we made our initial presentation to the GBI in the first quarter of 2021, I think it was mid-March, they refused to even look at the data. I mean, we provided sort of an overview, but a visual overview, but the actual nuts and bolts that was contained in a massive data set, they wouldn't even look at it until the following late September, early October. For all of those months in between, they were bobbing and weaving and ducking us, saying, we don't have jurisdiction. We can't really do anything with this. They would not, after we made that first presentation, they wanted nothing to do with it. The only reason that they finally looked at the data was to begin this drumbeat of discreditation of us by, I mean, there's so many levels to this story, and I want to not veer too far away from your original question of Bill Barr and his comments, but the idea, I mean, we never presented the GBI with photographic evidence. We never even got that far. So for Bill Barr to say, I took a look at the photographic evidence, means I went to see the movie, and the movie didn't show me anything. So it must all be, it must all be smoke and mirrors, rather than treating this with the appropriate level of concern. It can't go without saying that Bill Barr and his organization spent that year, 2020, over $100 million in geospatial data aggregation bought from a company called Ventel. I know exactly who they work with and exactly how they do it. I know exactly how exacting that data can be. Bill Barr and the FBI used that data in preparation for, and I do mean preparation for, January 6th. That is how they were able to move to indictments, even though he was no longer the Attorney General at that point. The Department of Justice was able to move to indictments in the J6 events within days because they already had the geospatial data worked up, spun up, patterned out. And so for him to just sort of kick this all to the curb as laughable is I believe, I just, knowing what I know about how it really works is troubling, to say the very least.
Let's jump into those other two accusations, and what you just said leads right into it. He had said that the geospatial data wasn't impressive, and then went as far as to give an example of some type of contractor. We don't know what it
Mm-hmm.
was. Was it a plumbing contractor? Was it an electrical contractor? We don't know, but apparently he took a lot of stock in what these people had to say when they said that 6 of those mules could have been their contract trucks just driving by those ballot boxes.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, one of the things we heard from the left right away is, oh, that's just people driving home from work. Well,
Right.
what I understand, and
Right.
ironically, I had a guest on a few weeks ago who was a CPA who audited the 2020 election, and he was pointing out that you guys actually used 3 data sets, which allowed your data to be much more accurate than it would have been if you'd only been using one, and that your data was accurate to within, I think he said, about 33 inches ballpark. Is that close? So if that's the case, this isn't people driving home from work. This isn't, as Bill Barr implied, a bunch of contract workers who happen to drive the same route every day. You would actually
Yeah.
have to get out of your car and walk over to those drop boxes, unless those drop boxes were hanging off the curb into the street.
Right. So I I feel it necessary to say that, as we established early on in this, I started True the Vote in 2009. When we took on this project in 2020, we started this in December of 2020 initially with an eye towards only the runoff that was coming up in Georgia. So we began based upon some information that had been given to us from an informant. We began in both Georgia and in Arizona. We began to pattern out, looking at Georgia first to see if what we were being told actually was visible in data. And then once we realized that it was, that's when we started looking back. So we had sort of a control set in 2021, then looking back into 2020. But I say all of that to make this point. The risk that we took in doing this project and bringing it forward, recognizing fully what was going to happen, that we would be put through the proverbial, meat grinder, because it doesn't fit the narrative that it was all a big lie. So we knew that we were going to get hit and hit hard. But the thought that I would put my reputation out on data like this, if my parameters for patterning were just cars driving by drop boxes, well, look how many cars drive by drop boxes, they must be mules, oh boy, I mean, that's ridiculous. Well, I mean, just the thought that we would be so careless in the processing. So dialing it back just a bit, the data that was used was bought from 3 different vendors, and because all vendors have different strengths, or the vendor set that is in this space have different strengths, and so a blend of those gives you the ability to weigh out certain variables and produce the sort of an optimized data set. The data that we relied upon, what is called ad key data, and that is the data that is harvested from the apps on your phone, whether or not you turn off you have your privacy settings dialed up or you have your location services off. All your apps on your phone, particularly those that are free. If an app is free, you are the product, and it is sending up signals about your whereabouts every few seconds. And those data elements include the timestamp, the lat long of wherever you are, and the elevation of the phone. So in other words, I'm getting a variable in the data that tells me whether I'm on the ground floor or if I'm on the 10th floor of a building. Now, with those elements, you can triangulate around velocity because you have time and you have the lat long. And so once you build out all of those algorithms and you begin to iterate the data and you cycle it through again and again and again, you begin a sift. So if you take those types of exacting data points, and then the geofence, which we physically went and measured around the drop boxes to come up with accurate lat long pinpoints. So you build sort of a digital fence around the drop box, and you are accurate in saying they weren't just hanging off the side of the road. You had to drive to these drop boxes. And then you can introduce things like velocity and time. What you end up with is, as you're going through the data, you begin to develop patterns of what the population, just writ large, what the population during the early election typically looked like. And then as you iterate and iterate and iterate, you get to a place where there is a subset that behaves very differently. And what was not shown in the movie were our quality control processes that not only took into consideration the number of times that they were going to drop boxes, but the times in which they were going to drop boxes, which was typically between the hours of 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. Doesn't make it illegal, just makes it unusual. And then the cherry on the top was that these phones none of the phones in our study behaved the same way in the months before or after the early election. They only behaved in that way during the early election. Now, unfortunately, that whole line of reasoning was not included in the movie, but it was included in everything that we tried to provide to law enforcement, certainly in what we shared with the FBI, but intentionally buried because it did not fit their narrative.
And we'll be right back with Catherine Engelbrecht of True the Vote right after these messages. What was the number of inches away from a drop box that someone had to be in order to be counted as a mule? I mean, was it 33 inches the way one person implied? If they got within 6 feet of one, as you determined what was and what was not a mule, how close did they have to come? What I'm trying to establish here is that they weren't in their car in the middle of the street. They had to be close to that drop box. I'm trying to find out how close.
And it depends. And there's so many dependencies. It depends upon the positioning of the drop box. It depends, and then we would draw an ellipse around the drop box. You had to go into that ellipse, and so the and if you think about pings going off every few seconds and different apps giving different pings, a ping had to occur within that ellipse, and that ellipse was typically within a few feet of the circumference around the drop box. So we likely missed far more than we saw. Additionally, they had to go repeatedly. In Atlanta, for example, it was a minimum of 10 times. And you think about the pings and the nature of the pings. And by the way, they had to go to at least, I think in Atlanta, from memory, 5 or more NGOs, which was the data element that came up later on. So they had to meet all of these criteria for us to really pattern them out. And the again, when you introduce velocity and time, a drive-by could not have occurred in these drop boxes were not drive-by drop boxes. You had to park and walk. And so unless you took your phone with you, we likely missed you, or we likely missed the number of times that a person might have gone. We got the data to a point that any law enforcement, and we have talked to many who were on the outside looking in of the times in which we were providing data, and were providing it in ways that they couldn't touch. It was outside of their jurisdictional capacity to work with, but clearly thought that there was a reasonable cause to look more deeply. And
He also said that just because ballots were harvested doesn't mean they're illegal. Some states allow harvesting, some states don't. Of the swing states you looked at, did they all allow harvesting? Could these be legal ballots that
no,
were harvested?
well, the broad answer to that is no. Harvesting in the places where we looked was not legal. Now, you do have variances of that. In Michigan, it was because of the back and forth that we think back to 2020, how quickly laws were changing and standards were changing. There were 2 weeks during which harvesting was made legal and then made illegal again. So there are all kinds of variables. But the key to this was in a perfect world, you would have had the video to be able to match directly to the cell phone data, so you could have seen for yourselves. Unfortunately, the video didn't exist in states like Michigan, where they told the citizenry that there was every camera was trained on these drop boxes. I mean, there were just a handful of drop boxes that had video cameras. Wisconsin, none. Philadelphia, the county in Pennsylvania, if it's there, they still haven't given it to us. And so Georgia was the best example, and even it had 15% of the video that out of what should have been available, we got about 15%, and even that, most of it was not usable. So anyway, there's so many. There's so many considerations inside of these measurements and inside of the ways in which we deduced to the targets that we began to take closer looks at. But the fact of the matter is this: the data, depending upon how deeply you want to drill down and how much data you have, and other variables like apps and what apps are on the phones in question, you can get down to centimeters of accuracy. The government can get down to centimeters of accuracy. That technology exists without question. If you think about just how accurate Uber can be in a free app, and then think about what paid professionals can do, and there's no doubt.
I'm told that the government can tell whether a coin is heads up or tails up from satellites in space. So,
Absolutely true. They can tell you what color your eyes are. Absolutely true.
wow. Well, let's just looking at Bill Barr's claims. He said there was no photographic evidence of the same people going back over and over again. You're telling me that data does that videographic evidence does exist. It just wasn't in the movie. Have you guys released that?
We've not,
Would you
for a variety of
Okay, I was going to ask if you'd
yeah,
consider
for
it.
a variety of reasons. Yeah, for a variety of absolutely. And in fact, we have a website called Open Inc. Open.ink that ultimately, at some point, this video will make it. Now, right now, we're in a lawsuit over all of this, of course, to no one's great surprise. And so, we've got to be very cautious about how we put things out, and then prepare for the backlash of, oh, well, you can't see that person's face, and you can't, that person only cuts through the corner of the video, and the marrying up of the video and the data. This is really, it's the work of law enforcement professionals. It will not play well to the public because they want to see full color, full face. I see that guy here, here, and here. And unfortunately, because of the quality of the video, it doesn't scratch that itch.
I understand.
I mean, artists, you know.
I totally get it, but that was like the number one criticism is I was out on social media defending True the Vote,
Hmm.
defending 2000 Mules. People were like, "Well, where's that video?" I would say if there's video that you have that you can eventually release where you've got the person where you can just tell it's somebody wearing the exact same clothes and we can sync it up with the cell phone data and you see the same person going to numerous drop boxes wearing the same clothes. Sometimes you can make out their face, sometimes you can't. That has to be released because that's going to take the left's number one criticism and toss it away. Now, I think you did a great job destroying Bill Barr's comment that somebody could have been contractors driving by, people driving home on the way from work. And as for the harvesting, that was just a flat out lie that just because they were harvested,
Hmm.
they weren't illegal. Because in some of the places, in fact, it sounds like most of the places that you looked at, harvesting was illegal. So for Bill Barr to say that, especially as the Attorney General, was just a flat out lie. But I don't want to end this on an angry note yelling at Bill Barr. I want to end it on a positive note because True the Vote is doing some absolutely great work. I'm extremely proud of what you and Greg have done. You've even gone to jail over this because you wouldn't release a source that you should have never been asked to release in the first place. And so I want to give you a chance to tell people very quickly, because I know we're out of time, how they can get involved with True the Vote, either by making a donation, showing up at the polls on election day. What can people do? I know you've got some big stuff coming. I saw your podcast last night with the cats, and
Oh
I've
gosh.
got one sitting on my desk right now. So the bottom line is, what can people do who want to get behind you and help you, whether it's financially or through physical hours donated? Tell people how they can get involved with True the Vote.
Sure, you can go to truethevote.org. You can certainly follow us on socials. We're, at True the Vote on just about every platform. Um, our website is in the midst of a coming overhaul that will have a very different look and feel, and will include, for the first time in a long time, some opportunities to work with us in volunteer capacities on the ground. Look, the fact is we've been on defense for a long time with the things that we presented in 2020, and we're still have a handful and then some of lawsuits that we're fighting. It is all an attempt to silence dissent, to take out anybody that may have an influential voice before 2024, so that the status quo big lie set can run the table, uh, thinking they can run it in the same way they did in 2020, and the American people are just fed up and aren't going to have it. So we invite anybody that is interested in honest elections to just sign up. I mean, frankly, just go to our website and sign up. We send out a weekly newsletter, and that's going to be the best place to find to be kept apprised of what we've got going on. Just voting is no longer enough. We need to be able to make sure that there is no polling place in our local elections left unmanned, that we have people just pouring out ready to volunteer locally. And if we do that, so much can be changed for the better so quickly. The problems that we face now are largely due to the fact that America has just sort of checked out of the process, and we've just assumed that it's going to be managed and well managed. And I think 2020, if nothing else, showed that there are a lot of questions about the accuracy of that process, and honest eyes and ears serving will go a long way to shoring up those deficiencies. So being prepared to serve in 2024 and projects that we have coming up, particularly in the space of voter registration and engagement, will go a long way.
Do you think the Mules will be back in 2024 minus their cell phones?
Look, I think there are always bad actors. The Mules were a phenomenon made possible by this push towards mass mail out of ballots and unregulated ballot drop boxes. Thankfully, many states have gotten rid of those ballot drop boxes or moved them inside, or done things to limit the exploitive potential. So will they be back? They're going to be back with a vengeance. Will the tactic be the same? I don't know, but what I do know is that there are millions more Americans now alert and willing to serve than there were in 2020, and for that, I think we have every reason to be hopeful that good will win the day.
And those Americans are alert because of the good work that you and Greg are doing at True the Vote. Catherine, it's been an honor having you on the show today. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I want to thank everyone for joining us today and remind you that if you'd like to subscribe to our newsletter, just text the word T, that's TEA, as in taxed enough already, to 44144. Once again, that's TEA to 44144. I also want to remind you that Christmas will be here before you know it. And at the TeaPartyPowerHour.com, we have a great selection of Donald Trump coins. Just go to TeaPartyPowerHour.com, click on the Trump Coins tab, and start taking a look at these beautiful silver coins that would be the perfect stocking stuffer for the Trump supporter on your list.
You've been listening to the Tea Party Power Hour with Mark Gillar.